Hello and welcome to Hekate Today, the podcast about Hecate and witchcraft in a modern and urban context, with your host, Jade Algsty. It was my original intention to record a new episode every night of the dark moon, the night of the dark moon being Hecate's datenon, and the moon phase that is most sacred to Hekate, but with the spring equinox falling on the night of the full moon this month, I couldn't resist wanting to record an episode on the spring equinox as it relates to Hecatean witchcraft practice. Ostara is primarily associated with Celtic origin witchcraft, though the Celtic Wheel of the Year has been adopted by many traditions. So the spring equinox isn't necessarily a festival that would have been celebrated in ancient Greece and doesn't particularly tie in to Hecatean practice. However, there are certain myths which involve Hekate and the springtime, and I think the spring equinox is a great time to celebrate these myths. Also, we can draw on some of the traditional Celtic traditions and thoughts around this time of year to influence and inform our Hecatean practice. I think it's nice to have a structure and framework that many different witches from many different traditions are using. In this way, we can celebrate our own festivals that mark the turning of the seasons and the turning of the year together, whether we walk different paths or not. Even if you don't particularly celebrate Ostara as Ostara and just understand the spring equinox as an astrological point in the year, I think it's a good time to think about the myths around the seasons which involve Hekate, particularly the myths which involve the springtime. It is true that Hekate is primarily known as a dark goddess, so in this sense we might associate her more with the end of the year, with Samhain and the autumn equinox and the winter. However, I think Hekate is a much more all-encompassing deity than this, and I think there are lessons we can learn from the springtime which are indeed very Hecatean. Furthermore, it is my view that life contains the seed of death, and death contains the seed of life. Summer contains the seed of winter, and winter contains the seed of summer. Endings contain beginnings, and beginnings contain endings. So in this sense, the spring is as important to the balance of things as the autumn is, and even as Hecatean witches we might be more drawn to that dark, deep, rich autumnal energy. I still think it's important to acknowledge the lighter side of life and the springtime and honour beginnings as well as endings. What's more, at the beginning of spring, as we may start to think about starting new projects or starting to go out more and be more social after our cosy winter hibernations, it's important to acknowledge the things that new beginnings bring to an end. Take our traditions of spring cleaning. Many people like to wipe away the dust that's built up over winter, open the windows, air things out. But it's impossible to clean without organising, and it's impossible to organise without discarding certain things. Often when we go to organise a space, we take the things we no longer need from that space and throw them away. So in this sense, the spring, while it's very much a time of new life and regeneration and rebirth, is also a time of closure and endings. And I think it's important to honour those endings in our practice in order to put ourselves into a state of mind where we can truly engage with and welcome in the new. Many of us like to make New Year's resolutions at the end of the traditional calendar year on the 1st of January, but you won't see exercise equipment and juices appearing on your standard supermarket shelves until springtime, marketers and advertisers know that at New Year's we're still in the depths of winter, and people tend to need that special springtime energy in order to be psychologically able to make those kind of changes. Many of us like to start diets and fitness regimes in springtime, and in order to succeed at a diet, we can't just look at what we want to bring into our lives, for example, fitter, trimmer bodies. We need to very much be looking at the things that need to end for us, such as comfort eating and perhaps any habits that are less than helpful. For this reason, it's important to honour the dark side of spring and the seed of death that is contained in life. And here, I think, is where Hekate can help us most. The primary myth surrounding Hekate and spring is part of the myth of Persephone. Persephone, in her aspect as Kore, the Shining Maiden, is spied gathering flowers by Hades, the lord of the underworld. Struck by her beauty, he kidnaps her and takes him down into the eponymous Hades, the underworld where he resides. Her mother, Demeter, the goddess of fertility and abundance and nature, mourns her daughter, and while seeking her in her grief, the land falls barren and the crops begin to die. Eventually, she asks Helios, the sun god who sees all, what happened to her daughter, and he tells her that her daughter was kidnapped by Hades. She speaks to Hekate for advice. Hekate is sometimes framed as Persephone or Kore's grandmother, but this varies according to different sources. It's Hekate who travels to the underworld. As a chthonic deity herself, she's able to, and leads Kore back to be reunited with her mother, at which time Demeter experiences joy and life comes back to the land again. During Persephone's time in the underworld, though, she ate 6 pomegranate seeds. It is known that if you eat while residing in Hades, then you can't return from it. As a result, because the seeds were only 6, it's agreed that Kore can return to the land as the Shining Maiden for 6 months a year, and the rest of the year she must reside in the underworld as Persephone, Queen of Hades. She is now gone from being a passive, kidnapped maiden to a queen in her own right and a consort to the god Hades. Whenever Persephone rises back to the land as Kore, her mother Demeter rejoices, and this is when spring begins, when Kore the Shining Maiden returns to the land. When, after 6 months, she descends back as Persephone, Queen of Hades, Demeter mourns, and the land is barren. And this is how the ancient Greeks chose to explain the difference between spring and summer and autumn and winter. If we look at this myth from the point of view of Persephone, we can see that both spring and autumn bring loss to her. When she returns to the land, she is indeed reunited with her mother and regains her more innocent aspect as Kore the Shining Maiden. But she has to part with her husband, no longer her kidnapper, but her equal and consort. While her mother Demeter may grieve her during the winter, this is a time for Persephone when she loses her mother and her girlhood and her innocence, but regains her womanhood and her husband. So you can see how in this myth, loss is sewn into both sides of the seasons. From a feminist perspective, this myth is less about spring and summer and life and death, and more about growth and becoming, and the different aspects of oneself. There is also the ebb and flow of our life cycles, the retreat into the depths of the caves of our homes in winter, when we might like to just curl up with a novel under a blanket, and spring, where we may feel more social and more like going out and joining and being part of the world. Hekate's place in this myth is one of the psychopont, the person who leads the spirit back from the underworld to the world. And as such, I think this is a good time of year to ask Hekate to lead us back to the world and guide us in our endeavours and new beginnings which we may wish to make during spring. We may also ask her to help us let go of that which needs to be let go of, and to be able to make room for these new things we wish to bring into our lives. A simple spell you can try yourself on the night of the full moon or any time after it is to light 2 candles to represent Hekate's 2 torches and call upon Hekate Dadushos and ask that she guides us from our own underworlds out into the world, and that she helps us let go of any attachments to the things which may be holding us back at this time. This spring equinox also falls on the night of the full moon, and one of Hekate's sovereign goddesses, Artemis, is very much associated with lunar energy and the moon, as her brother Apollo is associated with the sun. Artemis, like Persephone, is also a maiden goddess, known as a virgin goddess. It is not my belief that the term virgin, when we refer to the virgin goddesses, means literal virgin in the sense of not having experienced carnal relations. It's my view that we can read this term as meaning whole unto herself. Artemis is a very independent goddess. She does not need another to complete her, and she is quite capable of looking after herself, protecting her nymphs, hunting and living in the woods among women, without the need for a masculine consort or counterpart. During the full and new moon of spring and the Ostara cycle, it's a good time to call upon and work with our own maiden energies. Now, these don't necessarily need to correspond to our actual ages, but just aspects within us, the parts of us which are independent, wild-spirited and free. We may call on the support of others for our new ventures, but in terms of making any change within our lives, it's us who has to do the work. We have to be independent in these ventures and call upon ourselves as whole, independent, spirited beings. So Ostara and the time around Ostara are a good time to call on Artemis as the virgin huntress to help us hunt down our goals and achieve our ambitions, and also to be able to trust in ourselves and our own wisdom. So as you can see, the spring equinox does carry some very Hecatean themes with it, and very much centres 2 of her sovereign goddesses, Persephone, or as we may know her in the spring, Kore the maiden, and also Artemis, the huntress and goddess of the moon. I hope this short episode has provided you with some inspiration for how you may wish to work with Hekate during the spring equinox or Ostara. And to those of you listening out there, I wish you a joyful spring, full of growth, and all of the wonder of the new. I wish to end this episode with a reading of the 4th verse of the prayer that I recited the first 3 verses of last episode. This verse of this ancient prayer, over 2,000 years old, transcribed and translated from the Greek magical papyri, frames Hekate as the source of life and all things. And I certainly think at this time of year we can honour Hekate as a source of life. You encompass the vast world at night. You make the demons shudder and immortals tremble. O many-named goddess who brings glory to men, whose children are fair, O bull-eyed one, horned one, nature and all-mother, who brings forth gods and men. You roam around Olympus and traverse the wide and fathomless abyss. You are the beginning and the end, and you alone are mistress of all. For from you are all things, and in you, Eternal One, do all things end. You bear at your brow an everlasting diadem, the unbreakable and irremovable bonds of the great Chronos. You hold in your hands a golden sceptre which is encircled by a formula inscribed by the great Chronos himself, who gave it to you to bear in order that all things remain steadfast. Overpowerer and overpowered one, conqueror of men, you rule chaos, Araracha Arara, Epsis Kyrie. Hail goddess, and attend your epithets. Thank you for joining me today in this episode of Hekate Today. If you'd like to read more of my writings about Hecatean witchcraft, you can have a look at my blog, which you'll find at www.hecateswheel.home.blog, and Hekate there is spelt with a K. This is my blog Strophilos Rising, and I blog regularly about all things to do with modern Hecatean witchcraft. If you wish to support me and pick yourself up some witchy gear, including handmade and blessed pagan prayer beads, you can visit my Etsy shop at www.etsy.com/uk/shop/bath book and candle. Thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next time.